Hi, welcome to my channel. Today we are going to be doing another Book of Mormon Tidbits video, and this one's going to be on Alma's sacrifice. And I'm excited to talk to you today and to share these things with you. And it's one of my favorite stories in the Book of Mormon, like really one of my favorites. And so if you are new to my channel, I created this channel as a homeschooling resource to do different spiritual insights like I'm doing today to help you and your family and your homeschooling experience to keep Christ in your life. But I also do unboxing videos and some curriculum ideas, and I'll have some curriculum things coming up pretty soon. So if you're interested in those things, please hit that subscribe button. And let's talk about Alma's sacrifice. So I first wanted to start out just explaining a little bit of what's going on. So in a few weeks, and come follow me, we're going to get into Alma. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting really close. Alma is one of my favorite books in the Book of Mormon. Like, I love it so, so much. And so in the Alma chapter 1, we learn about the Nephites and how they're prospering, they're serving one another, they're giving to each other, and if they see people in need, they're helping each other out. And they're just this very industrious people, very kind people, and very humble people. And then in chapter 4, we read about a very different people. It's the same people, but 7 years later. And they have become very proud. They're not willing to give of their stuff to people anymore. They just turn them away. They're causing a lot of problems for the church. You know, these are members of the church that are being proud, that are wealthy, but not willing to give anything that they have. And so people outside the church are not willing to listen to, you know, missionary type people because they see what these members are doing and they're like, that's not a very good example. So why would I want to join that church? And so there's a whole bunch of problems going on in the church where there had been people that had been humble and willing to listen. Now they are not. There still are plenty of members that are, but there's a lot that are not, and it's causing a lot of problems. So at this time, Alma, the younger, is the chief priest, and he's the chief judge, the chief judge and the high priest. So he's kind of over the land. They got rid of kings and now they have judges, and so he's over kind of governing the land, but then he is the prophet, you know, and over the church as well. So these are really big responsibilities for him and for his people. So I wanted to read with you what his reaction is and what he does, and to just talk about a few things that this sacrifice that he makes teaches us. So in Alma chapter 4, we're going to read verses 18 and 19. So it talks about just right before that, how he found a man named Nephi and had him be the chief judge. He was like, oh, this person will be good to come in and govern the land and take my place. And then this is what Alma says. And really, truly, these are some of my favorite verses in the Book of Mormon. I know we're not supposed to have favorites, but these are them. So it says, now Alma did not grant unto him the office of being high priest over the church, but he retained the office of high priest unto himself, but he delivered the judgment seat unto Nephi. And this he did that he himself might go among the people, or among the people of Nephi, that he might preach the word of God unto them, to stir them up in remembrance of their duty, and that he might pull down by the word of God all the pride and craftiness and all the contentions which were among his people, seeing no way that he might reclaim them, save it were in bearing down in pure testimony against them. And I love these so much. It's just so powerful to me. He sees this need among his people. He sees that they're struggling. They're not where they were 7 years ago. They're kind of falling apart and forgetting about Christ. And the only thing that he sees that he can do is to give up being the kind of governor of the land and just focus on being the high priest and go out and be a missionary and teach these people about Christ and bear pure testimony of Christ. And I love, first of all, that he's very aware of the needs of his people, but then also that he's willing to sacrifice. I'm sure, you know, his life was, I don't know if luxury would be the correct term, but it was probably a little bit more safe and calm and predictable if he had stayed there. But he chose to leave and to go and be a missionary, which was going to be a very trying and difficult experience for him. And so I'm just grateful that he is willing to set that example and to do something that is going to be really hard, but also very, very rewarding for him. So as I was kind of reviewing this story and studying it, I looked up some different talks, and one of them that I found was by President Uchtdorf, and I'm chuckling because I just love his little explanation of Alma and who he was as a person. And so as I read this, I want you just to think about what he was giving up, and then also just who he was as a person. It's just great. It's so President Uchtdorf. This was a few years ago, so he was still President Uchtdorf at that time. So he says, every citizen of the Nephite nation must have known Alma's story. The Twitters, Instagrams, and Facebooks of his day would have been filled with images and stories about him. He probably appeared regularly on the cover of the Zarahemla Weekly and was the subject of editorials and network specials. In short, he was perhaps the most well-known celebrity of his day. But when Alma saw that his people were forgetting God and lifting themselves up in pride and contention, he chose to resign from public office and dedicate himself wholly to the high priesthood of the Holy Order of God, preaching repentance among the Nephites. So I just love how he explains it. First of all, I just think it's so funny, bringing it to our day of how well known he would have been and how well people would have known his story, his life, and who he was. And so that makes it difficult and easy to go out and teach people because they know who he is, and so maybe they don't want to listen, but he also has trust of some people, so it might be easier for them to listen. So I wanted to point out 3 things that we learned from this story. There's probably more, but these are 3 that stuck out to me, and then just share a personal experience of one of these things that kind of helps me relate a little bit to Alma's situation here. So the first one I want us to think about is, are we being a stumbling block to people outside the church? So that was something that these people, they were members of the church, they had become a stumbling block to people outside the church learning about Christ. So that was one thing that Alma saw, and he decided to go out and preach the gospel. So the second thing is, what are we willing to sacrifice? Usually something has to give. So sometimes there is a better way to accomplish the Lord's work, and it is usually following the Lord's way. It is always, not usually, what am I talking about? It's always following the Lord's way. And so I'm sure that Alma had a little bit of a tug of war with himself. In the scriptures, it seems like it was this quick decision, but I highly doubt that's what it was like. I'm sure he kind of thought through and was like, what is this going to mean if I leave and go out and preach the gospel? What is it going to mean if I stay? And he realized he couldn't do both. And it talks about that in the next several chapters. It kind of goes over how it was just too much to do both. He couldn't really focus and dedicate as much as he needed to both of them. He had to get rid of being either the chief judge or the high priest. And so he chose to follow Christ, and he followed the Spirit. It talks about that in verse 15, that he listened to the Spirit and he followed the Spirit to make this decision. And so usually in our lives, there are sacrifices. There are going to be sacrifices we have to make. It's probably not going to be easy. Some might be easier than others, but something's going to have to give. And I think right now that's kind of showing us, as we've kind of slowed down and are at home, when we start our lives back up again, hopefully before I'm like 50, then what are we going to give? Where are we going to is it going to be our family that we give and don't spend as much time with them? Or is it going to be something else that we realized during this time that maybe wasn't as important as we thought it was before? And it's more important to dedicate ourselves to Christ and our families. So the last thing is the power of pure testimony. And so I want you to think about, do you have a pure testimony of Christ? And do you share it with others? Are you sharing it with your family? Are you sharing it with your friends? It doesn't have to be this grand testimony, but are you sharing it with them? And is it centered on Christ? And do you truly believe it? Because that is how we bring ourselves to Christ. That's how we bring others to Christ, is through these pure testimonies. So I wanted to share a story about sacrifice that kind of helps me relate a little bit to Alma. It's probably, I feel like for Alma, this might have not been something he envisioned doing in his life, was giving up and leaving, and that makes it sound horrible when I say it like that, just giving up and leaving, but he gets grander things when he does leave. But I'm sure it wasn't what he expected, and so I have an experience that's like this. And so in college, I studied human development, and I wrote papers about homeschooling. Well, I wrote one paper about homeschooling, and I wasn't opposed to it, and I wasn't wanting to do it really either. I didn't have any kids at the time, but I still wasn't, yes, let's homeschool our kids. And so years go by, kids come, and then, there's 4 of them. And I decided that there's no way I can homeschool these kids. Like, I am not a patient person. I like my own time, and I just don't want to give it up. I'd rather have them at school all day. And I'm one of those that's like pushing them out the door because I'm excited for them to be gone. And so then our oldest was starting kindergarten, and we knew that he had struggles, that he had behavioral struggles and some like transition type struggles, and he throws tantrums. There was just a lot of little things that were happening, but he hadn't been diagnosed with autism yet at the time. And so we started him in kindergarten. It was a new place. We had just moved, and obviously a new school, and we were very upfront with the teachers and the principal about his struggles, and they tried to work with us a little bit. But then after the first month, it just seemed like they didn't want us to be there, and they weren't willing to work with us. And so over the course of that month, as I saw my kindergartner just really, really struggle and go from being very, very excited to go to school to just dreading it. And he has the most obedient little heart. His body and his mind just kind of get in the way sometimes, and it's really hard for him to do what people will expect him to do, and to change topics when people expect him to change topics, and come in from recess when he's expected to come in for recess. He has a really hard time, but you can see it in his face that he just wants to obey, and he really wants to find a way to just please you, and he just can't do it. And so as I saw him just kind of go downhill that first month of kindergarten, I started thinking again about homeschooling. I'm like, can I really do this? Like, I knew I could as far as I can teach them. I feel confident in my ability to teach basic, grammar and reading and math and all that kind of stuff. And between me and my husband, that would be fine. But it was more like, can I give up my time to do it? And so finally I brought it up to my husband, and he was completely shocked that I would even suggest it, because he knew how against it I was. But seeing me lose my child that way, just seeing him just become miserable, was one of those things where I couldn't just let him keep going like that and totally hate school and just feel like he was worth nothing. And so I gave up that free time, the extra time I had. And he was still my oldest, so I had a few kids at home, but gradually they were all going to be going to school, and then I would have all this time to myself. And now that was going to be gone by making this sacrifice and this commitment, because like Alma, I saw a need in my people, my child, and had to decide what needed to give. I still have personal time. I make sure I prioritize some things that I need to do, but now their education and making sure that they're progressing and understanding on their individual needs is more important to me. And some people love homeschooling. They always have wanted to homeschool. And again, I wasn't one of those people. I still don't think I'm one of those people. Some days go really well, but there's so many days that I'm just like, I just don't want to be doing this, and it's not my favorite thing. And I'm sure Alma had those moments too. He had a lot of success, but he also had really, really hard moments because he chose to go out and preach the gospel. He had people reject him and threaten to kill him, and it was a big struggle. And so the sacrifices in our life are going to require a lot of us. They're going to require us to give something up that maybe we think is worth more, but in the end, God's going to give us so much more. I feel like he's helping me become a better mom and just a better person by focusing first on the needs of my kids, and I focus more on teaching them about Christ. I feel like I've just created a more Christ-centered home, and it's not perfect, and we still blow up and make mistakes and go crazy, but we're trying. And so I just encourage you, if you're trying to make a difficult decision or just struggling, just to consider Alma and to think back on what he was willing to give up, but also the blessings that came from him giving up and becoming a great missionary and helping so many people come unto Christ. And so I just hope you have a wonderful week. I hope that you just feel your Savior's love and that you can just remember him, especially during this difficult time. And I will see you next week.